particular, we'll be exploring unique relationships between wildflowers and wildlife. We'll be uncovering some surprising methods of communication and diving into some incredible adaptations or unique ways that species have become better suited to thrive in their environments over time. But before I share my screen and before we jump into the presentation, I'm going to ask you to take a moment to picture or think of a really good friend, someone that you know and love really deeply. So just taking a moment to identify that person, and you can close your eyes or look away from the screen, take a little screen break if you've been on Zoom a lot today. And with our eyes either closed or gazing away, just take a moment to choose that one person, a really close friend, someone that you know and love deeply. And as you're picturing that person in your mind's eye, I'm going to ask you to think about, to notice how they appeared to you, maybe how their hair was fixed, or what colors are in their clothing. Maybe they have a favorite shirt or a favorite hat that stood out to you that came into that picture of them in your imagination. And think about where that person is from. Think about where they call home. Think about the first time that you met. And imagine a place where if you were to go, you would expect to see them there. Space. It could be in your home or out in your community, but a physical space that if you were there, you would expect to run into this person. Think about a place where you would be really surprised to run into them, a location that you're like, oh no, this person would not be here. And this person is a good friend of yours. So think about how you interact, how the two of you interact together, how your chosen person interacts with their family and their friends, maybe their pets. And then finally, I'm going to ask you to think about that person's name. And then if you haven't already, you can open your eyes or come back to the screen here. And so important. We use names all the time for so many important reasons. And they are only one part of the multitude of things that can be known about a being. Just one piece of this whole story of what could be known about a certain person or a certain wildflower. And so that's our goal for tonight, for Earth Day, is to dive deeper and to learn more about these other things, to continue to build our relationships as lifelong learners and admirers of wildflowers. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And when I get that screen up, we're going to do our second poll for tonight. And so our second poll, I'm curious what you know already about wildflowers. What is your level of wildflower knowledge? So I'm launching that poll. You should be able to see that on your screen. And we're just going to choose the option there that resonates with us the most. So we have an option of, I am completely new to the world of wildflowers. We have an option of, during spring, I recognize many flowers and I know a few of their names. We have an option that is, I'm pretty familiar with Sonoma County wildflowers, but I won't be giving a webinar about them anytime soon. And then our final option is, I identify as a hardcore botanist. So just giving us and each other a sense of your wildflower knowledge. Give it about 5 more seconds. Awesome. All right, I'm going to end the polling and I'm going to share the results. Let's see. Wow, it looks like a majority of us recognize many flowers and know some names. That's really great. Some of us are more familiar, some of us are completely new, and a few of us are really into our botany. That's so cool, really helpful for me to know. So why don't we take our collective knowledge with us as we start exploring those wildflowers tonight. So first up here, oh, wow, this is probably one of my most favorite wildflowers, and I'm just going to give you a moment to take in this little beauty. I mean, look, so incredible. So we're going to start off some of our first few flowers. We're going to be talking about those incredible adaptations, and I promised I'd be telling some stories, and I figured it's only right that I start off with the scary stories first. And so for this little flower, I want to tell you a story about how this flower and other flowers like it have been called botanical vampires. Botanical vampires. So you might have noticed that this little flower has a lot of flower and not a lot of leaves. And I'm going to tell you about why it doesn't really need them. So this incredible flower is what's called a hemiparasite. So it is possible for this flower to complete its life cycle independent of a host, but it prefers to use those parasitic abilities to send its roots down into the earth and tap into the neighboring root systems of the plants that it's growing with, and it can derive some or all of its nutrients from these surrounding plants. And that's how it earned its name of a botanical vampire. And so with that ability to mine nutrients from its neighbors, it doesn't need a lot of leaf foliage to do photosynthesis. Such a cool adaptation. And that is our good friend, the purple owl's clover, Castanea excerta. The purple owl's clover. Next up, we have another really cool friend. We're going to start out tonight looking at some of the pinks and reds. We're going to move through kind of the rainbow and head in to check out our yellow to orange flowers. And then we'll close it off tonight with our blue to purples as we get to know those. So this is a fun flower. And if you see this flower out in the wild, you are most likely going to need to peek underneath to really get the beautiful impression of this flower, because it's a little camouflaged from far away. And I have another adaptation story for you. So this flower, it is what's called an herbaceous perennial. So it lives for multiple years, but it doesn't necessarily bloom every year. This plant has a really incredible adaptation. And so over here in this figure, you can see this drawing of the resting leaf or nurse leaf. And I was so surprised when I learned this about this plant, that in certain years when this plant is starting off, for the whole year, it might only make that one nurse leaf. It's going to put up one nurse leaf. And you can think of that nurse leaf like a solar panel, like one little solar panel that's just collecting all that sunlight energy, storing it down in the root system. And then the next year, nurse leaf again, little solar panel again, collecting that sunlight energy, storing it in the root system. And over consecutive years, this plant is able to store up enough energy to be able to produce these beautiful blooms and the fruits and seeds that follow. And this friend is called checker lily, Fritillaria affinis. It goes by other common names too. You might know it as the chocolate lily or the checker lily. Next up, we're going to talk about a really unique relationship. And so this plant is often found in wet areas. I know it from growing along the Russian River, but it's also near creeks and other moist places. And this is a vine that is going to be growing in those areas. And it also has a camouflage flower, one that's a little tricky to find. But in the spring, if you look closely and follow the vine, you'll be able to find these incredible little pitcher-like blooms, like a little pitcher plant almost. And you'll find those blooms nestled along the leaves that we're seeing on the right, kind of these heart-shaped or spade-shaped leaves. And at the right time of year in the spring, if you look really closely underneath some of those leaves, you might find some eggs, or you might find some caterpillars like this one that are munching on this plant. So this is an incredibly unique relationship because this vine produces a toxin. And it produces that from the plant's perspective, its goal is to reduce herbivory. So that goal is to keep the plant from being eaten, right? To keep herbivores and plant eaters from munching on this plant. But not true for this little caterpillar. This little caterpillar has co-evolved with this plant, and it's the only place that the pipevine swallowtail will lay its eggs. It's the only host plant for the pipevine swallowtail. And the eggs will hatch from under these leaves, and the caterpillars will emerge, and they will start munching on the leaves. And not only are they not affected, like physically, it's not a negative to them to be eating this plant that produces this toxin, but it actually is beneficial to this little caterpillar because it is able to take that toxicity into its little caterpillar body. And now the caterpillar is toxic to its predators. And if that weren't cool enough, even as the caterpillar goes through metamorphosis and becomes a butterfly, it still retains that toxicity from its host plant. So it's still becoming toxic to most of its predators. It's a really unique relationship between this wild animal, the caterpillar and butterfly, and this really cool vine that we call California pipevine, or Aristolochia californica, California pipevine. Our next flower, next up here, another beauty. We're moving into some of our yellow colored friends. Wow. What is so cool to me about this flower, it has some really interesting adaptations. So like its cousins, like others in the Asteraceae family or the sunflower family, what looks like a single flower is actually way more than that. Maybe even up to 100 individual flowers. And we call that a composite flower. Composite flower. So it may first, but there is perhaps 100 individual flowers inside this one flower head. We have the ray flowers. And so where the petals are, each one of those has its own little ray flower as part of it. And then we also have these disc flowers. So in the center, each one of those is also a flower. Each of these little flowers has its own petals and reproductive parts in and of itself. And each one of those little flowers will need to become pollinated in order to form a seed. So when we imagine a sunflower head and all of those seeds that are inside, each one of those seeds was pollinated from this own individual flower. So incredible. What a cool adaptation. So what is it? What do we call this flower? Well, we know it as mule's ears. And knowing that, your next question might be, why? Why do we call it mule's ears? Well, I can give you so just like this mule's ears are standing up straight, that matches the leaf structure of mule's ears. So there are at least 10 different species of mule's ears, and what they all have in common is this erect leaf structure, this really upright structure of the leaves. So why might that help the plant? What sort of adaptation is this? It's pretty cool. When the sunlight, the hot, dry sun is coming down, with the erect leaves, there's actually less surface area. So less area on the surface of the leaf that is in direct sunlight. And that reduces evapotranspiration for this plant. So it's actually adapted to be able to live in really dry conditions. And part of that is thanks to this leaf structure that is light that's directly hitting the leaves and keeping more water inside the plant. What we've been looking at here is called narrow-leafed mule's ears, Wyethia angustifolia. And so again, there's at least 10 different species of mule's ears around, and the ones we've been looking at photos of are the narrow-leafed. All right, next up is this little cup of sunshine. And I recognize this little flower out on the trail by its 4 bright yellow spoon-shaped flowers forming that little cup. I love this photo because you can really see all the pollen that's in there. And here's a photo of kind of the whole plant, so you can get an idea of its leaf structure and kind of the whole plant structure, not just the close-up of the flower. So this plant has a really unique relationship with ants. And it has to do with the seed. So when this plant forms its seed, like many other plants, the seed has an extra little tasty morsel, an extra little protein nugget that is attached to the seed. And we call that an eleosome. And this is so delicious to the ants and even some slugs, but especially the ants, that they will come and they will find seeds that have this structure, the eleosome, and they will take the seeds back to their ant colonies. They will feed that little protein nugget to the larvae, and then they're not really interested in the seed. It's not super tasty, I guess. So they take that seed and they deposit it into their trash pile. Well, as it turns out, an ant's trash pile, you can think of it like a compost pile. It's a really nutrient-rich place and a really great environment for these seeds to germinate, for them to sprout. So what is so incredible that's happening here, this unique relationship between the ants and the species of plants like this one that make these seeds. What's so cool is that from the plant's perspective, the ant, it's mutually beneficial, right? So for the ant, it gets really tasty food and gets to feed its larva. And then the benefit on the plant side is that it relies on ants and these other insects for dispersal. So it's moving these seeds throughout the environment and placing them in really great locations for them to germinate and to establish new plants. So cool. Lots of different plants do this. The one pictured here, this plant is a hairy fruited broom. But how cool is it that these little ants will seek out these seeds and have this reciprocity between the species? Those are our sun cups. Sun cup, Pterexia ovata. Now, when I'm out leading wildflower walks, that I get really often is, how do I tell the difference between a sun cup and a buttercup? And it's so true when we're looking at flower guides and we might only be seeing a flower super close up. It can be tricky to learn the differences. And one of the ways that I can tell the difference, one of the big field marks for me, is the structure of the plant. So kind of how this plant is growing. So on the left, we have our sun cups. They're so cute. They only open up when the sun is up, and then they'll close. And they're really low growing. So they're a really prostrate, really low growing plant. And they're going to be kind of about ankle height while we're walking on the trail. Where our buttercups are going to be much taller. The taller plant structure, maybe even reaching out above some of the surrounding vegetation. Where our buttercups are going to be more of at our kind of knee height or below. So let's talk more about these buttercups. Let's dive right in. It is time for our next poll. We're going to do a poll here for the buttercups, and I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to just go ahead and make some observations. Take a look at this photo. What do you notice about it? What stands out to you about this flower? Give it about, and then I'll launch the poll. And we're going to ask you, what do you think? Do we share some similar observations? All right, so I just launched the poll. We're in progress. What do you think? What did you notice while you were observing? Which of these phrases is the best fit for you? Are you noticing that the petals are so shiny and bright? Are you thinking I would want to fly right in there, right in that little flower? Or maybe for some reason, you're thinking about butter. So those are our three choices. Give us about 15 more seconds to complete the poll if you haven't already. Let's see if we're having some similar thoughts. Five more seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And I'm going to share the results. Let's see. What did we have in common? What were we drawn to? It looks like, wow, 55%. So over half of us are thinking, you know, if I were a pollinator, I would want to fly right in there. And I have to tell you, if you were a pollinator, it would be, you might want to take a closer look first. So if you're a pollinator ready to come in for some pollen, you might not notice this incredibly camouflaged ambush predator that is hiding out in the flower. So incredible. So these spiders, often called a flower crab spider as their common name, and they actually do not make a web. They don't form a web. Instead, they hang out on the wildflowers and wait for their prey to come to them. These spiders are so incredible. They visit many different species of plants, and they even have the ability to change their body color to better suit the flower or the environment that they're camouflaging into. The change doesn't happen quickly. It takes maybe a day or two, but they're actually able to transform their color to be a better fit. Over here on the right, we're seeing a spider on our buttercup. This lower photo is a flower crab spider on a cream cup. And then up here we have a spider on a hound's tongue, another really cool plant. So what a unique relationship that these spiders have to our wildflower friends. So our next most popular option, the next thing that folks were thinking about is, wow, that is a bright and shiny flower. And I have to agree, it really is. So why is it so shiny? Well, as you can see in this photo, it is extremely reflective. So the petals of the buttercup, this is special to the buttercup family, they have on their petals the epidermal layer. It's kind of like epidermis, right? So the skin layer of their petals has not one, but two flat surfaces. So it's incredibly reflective. It's catching that light and bouncing it off of those cells and back out. And this is really, really attractive to the pollinators. It's a really good communication method to call those pollinators in. And not only is it reflecting in the visible light spectrum, it's also reflecting in the UV light spectrum, which is especially intriguing for the pollinators. All right, and so our last option, there was a few of us out there that are like, I don't know why, I'm just can't stop thinking about butter. And maybe it's because you have played the kids game where if you're out and you see a buttercup, you can go over and you can put the buttercup right underneath your chin. And if your chin reflects yellow, that means you like butter or margarine. So guess what? Everybody likes butter, right? This happens, it reflects on everyone's chin because just like we spoke about earlier, those double flat surfaces are highly reflective, and that's what's responsible for creating that really fun kids game of finding out who likes butter. So we've been looking at the California buttercup, such a sweet little friend, the California buttercup, Ranunculus californicus. All right, let's keep going. Oh, okay. This is another really beautiful photo. We just kind of have to take a minute to take in what's happening here. So here we're seeing the buttercups, and they're mixed in growing with another wildflower friend, the blue-eyed grass. And I look at this photo and I feel like that is a really beautiful color combination. And I'm not the only one that thinks that. The pollinators do too. So this is another surprising method of communication, is these color contrasts. These color contrasts happen across all different species, different wildflowers that are in those purple and blue hues might be growing intermixed with wildflowers that are more in those yellow orange hues. And that contrast is so intriguing to the pollinators. They actually, studies have shown that the pollination is more efficient, it's more effective when species of these kind of these colors are growing together. So studying whether, imagine there was a patch of blue-eyed grass with no buttercups in it, and we compared that to a patch of buttercups with no blue-eyed grass in it. And then if we look at this intermingling, the studies have shown that those intermingled plants with that color contrast are more efficiently and effectively pollinated because to these color contrasts, which is so cool. And so blue-eyed grass really took that information to heart. So when we look at blue-eyed grass, we see that those purple yellows are happening right inside the very same flower. So that incredibly bright yellow center is a method of communication for the pollinators. Not only is it attractive to call them into the flower, but it's also showing them exactly where to go to get the pollen that they are looking for. When I talk about blue-eyed grass, I tend to say blue-eyed grass is a species that's common name is really easy to remember because it's not blue and it's not a grass. So, you know, it's a little tricky, but the blue-eyed grass does have these almost iris-like, or you could say grass-like leaves. And then this, to me, it's very purple, but kind of that spectrum of purple-blue is going to be our friend, the Western blue-eyed grass. Sisyrinchium bellum, blue-eyed grass. All right, next up, another beautiful friend as we're going through these purple blues. Oh, and it's time for another poll. This is our last poll here. I am wondering what you were thinking about this flower. So I'm going to go ahead and give you, let's take 30 seconds to look at these sets of 3 photos here, and then I'll launch the poll. And we'll do the same thing we did with the buttercups. We'll see how our observations compared. What stands out to you? What do you notice? I'll go ahead and launch the poll. What are you thinking now? Choose the option that is the best fit for you. We have a few different options and our votes are starting to come in. So far in the results, many of us are noticing that looking at the petals, we notice there's different color patterns on the same plant. Some of us are wondering, can I eat those bean things or what? And then our last option is, for some reason, I'm thinking about wolves. So we'll go ahead and take about 15 more seconds to cast your vote. Which one is the best fit? Which one resonates with you most? Are you noticing those color patterns? Are you thinking about eating those bean things? Or you don't know why, you're just thinking about wolves? All right, I'm going to go ahead and end our poll and share our results. Wow, so 83% of us, a really big majority, is noticing those different color patterns and that they're on the same plant. 12% of us are wondering that question about, can we eat those bean pods? And about 6% of us are just off in wolf land and may not know why. So why don't we talk about these different color patterns first? Let's jump in there. So as we look at this flower, this inflorescence, there's multiple flowers on it. And that color change that we're noticing is happening here. We have white, and then here we have this purple kind of maroon color here. And this is a story about a surprising method of communication. So when these flowers are first opening, this spot, we call it the banner spot, is going to be white. And just like we've been, is really intriguing to the pollinators. It really calls them in. They like that contrast. And so when the flowers are just beginning to open before they've been pollinated, we're going to notice this white banner spot. And then as the flower has become pollinated, it will fade. That banner spot will fade to this more of a purple or even a blue color, a color that's going to match the rest of the petals on the flower a little more closely. And so when we think about this, this is really incredible, communicating to the pollinators, letting them know which flowers still have pollen and are still in need of their service. And it's mutually beneficial, right? There's reciprocity here. It's good for both species. The flowers are becoming pollinated very efficiently because they're not sending the pollinators off wasting time on flowers that don't have pollination. And it's really good for the pollinators because they are saving energy. They're able to save that energy and be really efficient and get the pollen that they need. So really cool story of surprising methods of communication. All right, so our next most popular observation was, tell me about those beans. So as you may have noticed, these beans, or they even kind of almost look like beans or peas, this is the seed pod, the fruiting body and the seeds inside of this plant. It reminds you of beans or peas, probably because they're related to them. So they're in the legume family, and so they look really similar. Okay, so I still haven't answered the question, can you eat them? And my answer to that is, it really depends on who you are. So if you are a California quail or another songbird, if you are a small rodent, then yes, you are definitely interested in eating those seeds. Now, this isn't true for all species of this plant, but for some species of this flower, there have been some studies that have shown that for livestock, especially for sheep and for people, they can have a toxic effect. So I don't recommend eating them if you are a sheep or a human. And that sort of brings us back to this idea of building relationship, right? Getting to know our friends. So I always recommend, before you go munching on anything that you find out in the wild, really get to know it first and get to know its lookalikes, and build that relationship so that you can have that relationship with those plants. Okay, wolves. What is going on with wolves? Why is Shelly asking us about wolves? Well, this plant, lupine, comes from it's the common name lupine, scientific name lupinus. That comes from the root word lupus, which means wolf. And the reason that lupin and wolf were associated is because lupin has the ability to grow in really harsh soil types. So soil types where there's really low nutrients, sort of maybe a deficient soil, they are able to grow in those soil types. And part of the reason why is because of this really incredible adaptation and this unique relationship that's happening on their roots. So, like other members of the legume family, they have nodules on their root. And inside there is this incredible symbiotic relationship happening between the roots of the lupin and a bacteria called rhizobia. And what's really incredible is that through this symbiotic relationship, the plant is able to pull nitrogen from the air, which normally wouldn't be very available to the plant. But through this relationship with the bacteria, the nitrogen can be pulled out of the air and can become converted into a form that the plant can actually use. So rather than this idea of that the lupin was wolfing up all the nutrients, that it was stealing all the nutrients and creating this poor soil, it's actually this really incredible adaptation, this reciprocal relationship that's allowing for it to get the nutrients it needs, even when they may be lacking in the soil, which is really incredible. So we've been looking at photos of miniature lupin. It looks really similar to sky lupin, which is larger. But yeah, miniature lupin is the photos we've been looking at. Lupinus bicolor. Okay, here is another beautiful favorite friend. And this flower, its story has to do with those unique relationships with wildlife and especially with mammals. So this plant has a really cool type of root storage organ called a corm. It's similar to a bulb, but a little bit different. But it is the root structure that's underneath the ground, storing that energy. And lots of mammals find corms very delicious. So black bears and pigs and gophers and many other species are munching on these delicious corms. And our first reaction might be like, oh no, they're eating the corms of the plant. But what really surprised me is that, again, there's coevolution here. There's a reciprocal relationship. So corms, by nature, they will often grow these little baby kind of corms. Sometimes they're called cormlets or cormels, and they grow kind of on the corm. And if those are broken apart, or even a part of the corm is broken off, that piece is able to then generate into its own plant. So as the black bear is digging for the corms and munching and pieces are breaking off and maybe walking throughout the land and dispersing, there's actually a spreading happening. So even though there's a ingestion by these mammals, there's also some giving back of helping to disperse and continue for these flowers to carry on for their next generation. And so those flowers we've been looking at are called blue dicks, and they're called blue dicks because of the genus Diclostema. And what's really interesting to me is that the genus changed. It's not called Diclostema anymore. They have a new scientific name, and now they're called dipterostemen. So, blue dicks and Diclostema, now we have dipterostemen. So I am proposing that we start calling these flowers Blue Dips, because I think it's super cute and very fitting. And they might be ready for a new name. And so I've been calling them Blue Dips all spring, and it's really fun. And I invite you to try it and use it too. Maybe it'll catch on. And so, I mean, that's what happens when you get to know these friends really well. You might start to develop nicknames for them. So, my invitation to you is to go out and to get to know your wild, build these relationships with them. And that might be reading about them or watching a video or drawing them, or creating art. And most importantly, I want to invite you to go visit them. It's really important that we visit our friends and spend time just hanging out with them, and we can admire these flowers, and we can look for the crab spiders and the caterpillars that might be happening, and notice these different adaptations and relationships. So my closing thoughts for you tonight are, please, I invite you to continue to get to know your wildflower friends, to continue to build that relationship. And so with that, I will hand it back to Corby for some closing remarks.
All right. Thank you so much, Shelly. That was super fun and creative, and definitely going to use the word blue dips from now on. And so cool to learn about the ants spreading the seeds. I didn't know that either. And I remember the first time I saw a crab spider was when I was trying to set up a time lapse so that I could capture a poppy flower opening. And then when I went back and looked at the footage hours later, I was so surprised when the flower opened and there was a spider inside that was camouflaged. And I thought, who is that spider? And it's so fun to learn about the crab spider. So thanks for all that. And we're going to get a chance for folks who are tuning in to ask you questions in just a moment using that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if anyone out there has some pressing questions for Shelly, use that Q&A button down at the bottom, and we'll get to those in a moment. But before we do that, I just want to let you know how you can keep engaged with Sonoma Land Trust. You can do that by following our various social media accounts like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and please go to our website, sonomalandtrust.org as well. There's a lot of cool stuff on there. And if you want to see some of our past Language of the Land presentations, we've got a whole bunch of them that we've been doing throughout the pandemic, and some of them are really excellent. And you can also download educational materials. And so this is all on our Nature at Home page, which is on our website. And you can find that by going to sonomalandtrust.org/nature-at-home. And if you want to join our next webinar, that one's going to skip a month and then come in June, on June 17th. It's going to be awesome. It's a sense of place at Bodega Head. And that's with Jackie Sonas from the Bodega Marine Lab. And you can register for that by going to sonomalandtrust.org/outings. And in the meantime, before June 17th comes around, if you want to do some more virtual hikes, I'll be leading several throughout May, where we're going to follow the wildflower blooms as they moved like a wave from the Mayacamas Mountains in the east over to the Jenner Headlands on the coast. So please join me for those virtual hikes. And I also want to mention that Sonoma Land Trust is a nonprofit organization, which means that we rely on donations from individuals, businesses, and foundations to make our work possible. So if you like what you heard today and you want to save the beautiful and stunning landscapes of Sonoma County, please consider donating. Your gift to help support land protection and preservation. So if you want to make a donation online to Sonoma Land Trust, visit sonomalandtrust.org and click the donate button. And thank you very much for that, because in these uncertain times, we really appreciate everyone who's supporting our work. So at this point, I'll open up the Q&A here so that we can all ask Shelly what's on our mind. And first question is, where can we find some of these flowers that you featured today on this presentation?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And so many of the flowers that were highlighted in this presentation are common and can be found at many of our parks and open spaces throughout the county. One resource, if you don't already know about this, I'm going to do a quick little plug for iNaturalist. And so iNaturalist is incredible for so many reasons. It's an app that you can download on your phone or you can do it on your web browser. And it has a bunch of different features, including if you're out on the trail and you find an observation that you are curious about, you can take a photo of it. And so the kind of purpose of iNaturalist is this idea of community science, right? Getting all of us that are, not necessarily in the field of science out on the land and bringing in this crowdsourcing these scientific observations. So when you take a photo and you post it to that, you're really helping to create this baseline data that's really important as we're kind of cataloging all of these changes. But I bring it up because it has two other really cool features. And one is that you can take a photo of anything. And well, I don't know anything, but I mean like a flower or a butterfly or a bird. And it has some really good AI. It's gotten really good in this last year or two. And it'll tell you what it thinks that you're looking at. So it's a good way to do some identifications. And then another tool with iNaturalist is you can go on there and you can explore. And so if you were like, today's my hiking day and today I really want to see blue-eyed grass, you could go in and look at their explore feature and it will show you some of the different areas around you where that particular species that you're looking for has been observed. And so that's one recommendation I have when people are looking for places to go to see really specific flowers.
All right, thanks, Shelly. And I'll just throw one in there. A little bit later this spring, the Jenner Headlands has some amazing flower fields in the serpentine zone of the Jenner Headlands. So definitely check that out because there's nothing like standing in a field of golden flowers with the ocean in the background. All right, we'll move on to another question here. It's about my favorite crab spider there. This person is asking if the spiders are beneficial to wildflowers in some way, because it seems like if they're eating the pollinators, they might not be.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that I don't have a solid answer to. So I have become fascinated with these little spiders, and from your question, I'm definitely inspired to do some more research and find out. In my experience, I think of myself as an ecologist. So, that word ecos means home. So I'm studying my home, and that means that I can be quite a bit of a generalist and may not have some of these specific answers. But as I've been studying my home for my whole life, I am continually surprised at the examples of reciprocity and how often there are unknown interactions that are there for a reason, right? These coevolutions have happened in many cases because it was beneficial. So I don't know the answer. I think it's a great question. Maybe we can learn more about that together.
Definitely, we're always still learning. So this question's from Kathleen. I'm not sure if you meant to, but you said that some cups for petals you called flowers. Is calling them petals incorrect?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, so I guess when I was speaking about the sun cups, I may have referred to the flower and then the 4 yellow petals on the flower. So again, I'm a generalist. I'm not I wouldn't have chosen the poll. I identify as a hardcore botanist. But My understanding is that suncaps do have 4 downturned sepals, and then they also have 4 yellow petals. Um, and that's something that, again, I would invite us all to look into a little bit deeper. But as I'm sitting here, that is my understanding. So um, we can all go and Google it and see if I'm right or not. I don't know. And then I still think that a flower would be an appropriate term. Um, Corby, do you feel like that answers that question, or did I miss something there?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Cool.
Another question from Anne is, blue dips aren't blue, so why are they called blue?
Yeah, that's also my question. I have the same question for blue-eyed grass, right? And it's really interesting how many flowers are interpreted as a color that I don't feel like I would have chosen for the name of that. And it happens really often in the purple blues, like more often than in the other spectrums. There's lots of places where that overlaps. And so it's kind of interesting too to think back. And like, I wonder if kind of how we've referred to colors has changed over time, or if, I don't know, someone was just being silly and decided to name all the purple flowers blue.
I'll go with silly people. There's a question here about whether or not there's a book that you can recommend to learn more about Sonoma County flowers, a book that one can carry along while hiking.
I can, and I should have had it a little bit closer to me. Hold on. Okay, thanks for holding on for a sec. This is one of my favorite guides, and I carry it often. It's fairly, lightweight considering. And I use it a lot when I'm leading hikes too. So this is Wildflowers of the North Coast Range, and it's by Rennie Parker. And so the reason I really recommend this guide is because it's also done by color. And this is really a good guide for beginning to learn your flowers, right? And especially if you don't identify as a hardcore botanist and you may not find some of the guides as user-friendly if you're not as familiar with some of the technical terms. And so this is a really great guide for being able to flip through and being like, it looks like that one. So I highly recommend this book. And I also want to invite, if other people have favorite guides out there, maybe we could share in the chat and do some sharing of resources, what else people like to carry.
Yeah, I like Rennie's book as well. I
Yeah.
have that here with me. It's a great book. But usually I leave this at home. When I get home, I can look through because it's kind of heavy. And what I carry out in the field is this very simple book, Wildflowers and Flowering Shrubs. It's by a Sonoma Land Trust member, Ralph Johnson, who's just been, documenting flowers in Sonoma County and Point Reyes for decades. And he just prints them out in small amounts. And if anyone out there is interested, you can email me, corby@sonomalandtrust.org, and I'll see when the next printing is. But this is cool because it doesn't tell you much about the flowers. It's just an identification, but it's arranged by color. And then there's a green spot next to the flower if it's a native, and a red spot if it's an invasive. So it's really light and easy to carry. And so if you just want to know what something is and then learn more about it later, this is a pretty cool book.
Awesome. Yeah, I did want to see, I saw Shirley's comment about hearing that the book is out of print. And yeah, so my understanding is Rennie had a first version that was kind of even more localized than this one. I want to say it was like either Sonoma Napa Marin or like Sonoma Napa Marin Mendocino. And then this one, I believe you can still, one is super hard to find, but I believe you can still get the revised edition, and it's expanded to kind of go up the coast and include some of these other counties. So this one, hopefully you can still find.
Great. And Sarah recommends John Muir Law's Sierra book, So
Yes. Yeah.
that's some good stuff.
Oh no, revised edition is also out of print. Oh man, we're gonna have to start. We need Rennie's contact info. Rennie Parker, RennyParker. And Corinne saying eBay. Yeah, get creative. Use bookstores. I find a lot of really good guides in used bookstores, or at least fun ones.
All right, so I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. So if anyone out there has any, please feel free to ask away. And I guess I'll ask you one, Shelly. Do you have a favorite go-to place to see wildflowers in Sonoma County?
Well, Corby, I have to say, we've done those partnership hikes out to Tole, and I love Tole Lake Regional Park. It's one of my favorite places in our county. And I recently moved out to that area. I used to live on the Russian River, and so I have found myself out at the Tole Meadows quite frequently this spring. So I would have to choose that one as my favorite right now.
Yeah, I haven't been out there yet this year, but I'm going there tomorrow morning. So
Oh, cool.
hopefully those gold fields are still out there. Great. Well, we've got a lot of messages of appreciation for you, Shelly, in the chat. So thanks so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge and your fun facts. It was really enjoyable and definitely learned a lot.
Great. Yeah. Thank you. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate everyone for coming, and yeah, go hang out with those flowers. There's still time. Go find them.
Definitely. All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a wonderful evening and try to get outside and enjoy the springtime.
Good night.